Endings in video games are weird, and I feel like we don't point that out anywhere near as much as we should. Think about it. In literally any other form of media, a story always ends the same way. No matter what you do, Sam and Frodo are always going to destroy the One Ring, the Titanic is always going to sink, and that Godot guy they were waiting for is never going to turn up, which I think is false advertising, but that's beside the point, because in video games, endings are a bit trickier. They don't always happen the same way for different people. For every person who played Papers, Please as a loyal citizen of Astoska, another helped stage a rebellion against the totalitarian government, and another got caught being too nice to Georgie and got sent to the gulags. Or what about playing a dating sim like Monster Prom? Many other people didn't end up kissing Calculus the robot like I did, and somehow they still had their own totally valid playthrough of the game despite making the objectively incorrect choice, and I think that is fascinating. Unless you include the movie Clue, which doesn't really count, no other medium allows its audience to direct the flow of the story like video games do, and alternate endings are in many ways the ultimate form of this idea. Since the dawn of choose-your-own-adventure books, alternate endings in games as a concept have been incredibly popular, and there's no big mystery as to why. People love that feeling of control and self-expression that comes from being able to decide how a story resolves. From which friends end up accompanying you to the final battle, to making fundamental moral choices that drastically reshape a game's narrative. I don't have to tell you that alternate endings are brilliant, but as anyone who's familiar with them will know, they also bring with them quite a few problems. In so many otherwise well-written games that give players lots of room for self-expression, alternate endings have this weird habit where the games with the most potential for interesting, empowering endings are often the ones that fall apart the worst when they actually get there. The Far Cry games try to use alternate endings to make a point, but they always end up really bleak and fatalistic because their stories have nowhere to go beyond the bad guy actually being right. Detroit Become Human is so focused on its pitch of giving you as many choices and potential endings as possible that the game isn't really able to focus on being about anything beyond a really hacky civil rights allegory. And in Fallout 4, the game promises a choice between 4 totally different and ideologically opposed factions, but the ending is basically the same regardless of who you pick, and the status quo afterwards never changes. And who can forget Mass Effect 3? A game with genuinely good writing and interesting player choices 95% of the time, but that squandered 2.95 games worth of great sci-fi by trying to boil down its entire story to a single 3-way choice, leading to BioWare needing to rush out a fixed ending that still didn't really work very well either. But I'll get back to that. Many of these games have actual artistic aspirations, proper writers behind them, and pretty satisfying avenues for player self-expression in other areas. So why are multiple endings specifically such a huge stumbling block? Well, I was wondering this basically for ages, and it wasn't until I managed to play a duo of recent games that defy how we think alternate endings are supposed to work, The Stanley Parable and Citizen Sleeper, that I realised we have this whole thing backwards. The difficulty with alternate endings isn't usually with how we make them, but how we think they're supposed to work. To show you what I mean, let's first go through some of the biggest issues with how most games handle multiple endings so that we can break down what our big mistake actually is. The first and most obvious hurdle that games with multiple endings run into is a question of scale. If there's one thing that players expect out of an alternate ending, it's for it to feel like their choices are powerful and have a nice pronounced impact on each ending. However, the more divergent each ending or ending path is, the more development and writing resources have to be devoted to it, both for the content of the ending itself, and also for whatever leads up to it and justifies it being an option at all. What this often means is that in games that offer players a lot of different choices for their preferred ending, they often don't have the development resources they need to have each ending feel meaningful, as they're all sort of underbaked. I think this problem can be most clearly seen in, and hear me out here, the terrible Shadow the Hedgehog game. The game, to its credit, has a bunch of branching plot lines and a whopping 10 different regular endings, all based on the path you take through its levels. As you might expect though, making each of these potential endings track logically through each of the 362 possible paths through the game is way beyond the development scope of Shadow the Hedgehog, and that means that basically none of the paths feel coherent, and all of the endings feel like they may as well have come out of nowhere. Is Shadow murdering Sonic in cold blood like the edgy fuckboy he is really a good-lined ending? The game certainly seems to think so. Another consequence of games shooting for multiple endings simply not having the resources needed to flesh them all out is one ending getting preferential treatment over the others. As much as I love Chrono Trigger, which has a variety of alternate endings based on where in the story and when in time you kill the final boss Lavos, it's really only got one ending with any meat to it. The rest are either what-if scenarios, like where you end up making Frog a member of the royal family and creating a Frog timeline, or one where you kill Lavos in the first 30 minutes of the game and get to chat to the developers. It's cool, don't get me wrong, but no ending bar the one where you actually use the Chrono Trigger works very well as a conclusion, and it's a bit misleading to say that the game has multiple valid endings when it's really only got one. The only games that manage to have wide-reaching, impactful consequences in their endings are, ironically, games that heavily restrict how much choice a player has. Fire Emblem Three Houses might have 4 great endings, but it's only free to flesh them out because it locks you into each one early and permanently, with one minor exception. This allows the game to make each ending feel unique by focusing on a different cast of characters who view the world in a unique way for each one. The Black Eagles story, for example, is all about the price of justice, and the Blue Lions plot is about revenge. The game never would have been able to orient its roots and endings around specific themes if it allowed players to make their own house or change allegiances halfway through the story. In restricting the player to a specific branching point, these endings feel rich and well set up because Three Houses simply doesn't give the player the chance to fuck them up. This is all well and good. But what about games that do grant the player more direct agency when it comes to determining their ideal ending? After all, that's what alternate endings are advertised as being all about, right? Well, many games, instead of relying on fixed branching paths, determine what ending a player gets through gameplay alone. This can have a few advantages, most notably, players developing a much more intuitive attachment to the ending, because it's very easy to understand what went into it and how you got there. Pikmin is probably a nice, clear example of this in action. The single thing that determines whether you get the good, average, or bad ending is how many ship parts you manage to collect once the game's 30-day timer elapses. If you get fewer than 25, you get the bad ending and Olimar dies, more than 25 but not all of them, and you get the average ending where Olimar just about escapes, or if you get all 30, Olimar gets this big happy send-off from all his Pikmin pals. You never actually stop and choose which ending to get, or make any direct narrative decisions. It's all dependent on your organic gameplay choices, and that's what makes getting the good ending feel so triumphant. Although, this blending of gameplay choices and narrative outcomes can create some problems, such as in the creation of an incentive to optimize. Bioshock 1's ending, for example, is determined by how many little sisters you choose to save, the good guy option, or harvest, the selfish bad guy option. The game frames being selfish as giving you more precious Adam to upgrade your powers and survive, but because the reward you get from Bridget Tenenbaum for being nice actually outweighs this, there's literally no reason to be evil beyond arbitrary cruelty. Saving the sisters isn't just moral, it's optimal, effectively removing a player's narrative agency over the ending because it's influenced by strategic choice. Many games with more balanced morality systems still manage to fall into this trap too. In, say, Knights of the Old Republic, you get different abilities, get different items, and have access to different party members if you're a Jedi versus being a Sith. And this is cool, but by not leaning into one side completely right from the start, you make yourself demonstrably weaker, effectively locking you into the good or evil ending before the story has even really begun, because not doing that would make it harder to actually get to the ending in the first place. The only way to save mechanically derived endings from the player's need to optimize is often just to set them against this very impulse. In Silicon Dreams, you can't optimize saving as many of your robot pals from the scrap heap as possible because that will probably mean getting decommissioned yourself, meaning you've got to play your cards right to get the best ending. And the struggle to get the pure ending of Dawn of War 2 Chaos Rising is only interesting because resisting the influence of chaos means turning down cool new abilities and temptingly powerful gear. However, even these fixes require structuring the entire game around a very simple binary, often defaulting to hard thing good, easy thing bad. Multiple endings have such a huge warping effect that it's almost impossible to use them to make a nuanced point and have direct player influence over the ending, because most people will just default to the one that's most fun to get. Look no further than more people getting Dishonored's more fun bad ending than its slower, less flashy good ending for evidence of that. The dual threat of multiple endings being both overwhelmingly complex and too vulnerable to player optimization has led to many games trying not to reduce the player's power over the ending, but instead reduce its scope, minimizing the effect the ending has over the game as a whole. Many games do this by making the entire game more or less linear, but with a single huge choice right at the end that determines which ending you get. While this setup is efficient and can create a very impactful feeling decision, this issue of limited player scope for input and consequences can often feel like a bit of a cop-out, or even worse, like your eventual decision is arbitrary because these endings sometimes fail to take your individual journey up to that point into account. Take the endings of Deus Ex Human Revolution for example. Once you've gone through the terrible final boss who should just be cheesed with the laser gun, you get to pick one of 4 different endings based around what you think of human augmentation. Except the game's not really about that. In Human Revolution, augmentation is more of an aesthetic, and the actual meat of the story is about corporate greed and Jensen's attitude to violence. What this means is that all the investment you've put into deciding what kind of guy Jensen is over the course of the game basically goes nowhere because it doesn't really factor into the ending, which is based on a big picture moral quandary the game never really addresses in any depth, leading to players overwhelmingly picking the, I don't know, let people decide for themselves, cop-out ending. Contrast Human Revolution's endings with, say, Paradise Killers. In PK, the entire investigation leads up to your eventual decision of who you're going to convict and kill for committing the crime to end all crimes. Rather than zooming out at the last second to get you to consider the moral implications of basically every single character committing genocide and thinking nothing of it, Paradise Killer restricts its ending to the outcome of the case and nothing else. Because of this specific focus, any of Paradise Killer's many possible endings will feel meaningful because they all directly follow on from your investigation, up to and including choosing whether to convict innocents because they deserve it and spare the guilty because they're cool. These last second endings where you choose between a bunch of ending cutscenes intuitively feel like the best of both worlds, where the ending choice is both impactful and ultimately in the player's hands. But if they're not handled very carefully, these endings can also end up undermining both a player's satisfaction and the overall arc of the story. Now, there are loads of examples of games falling into exactly this overambitious trap, from GTA to Infamous. But let's be honest, there's one candidate that stands out amongst all the rest. Look at Mass Effect 3, arguably the highest profile failure of multiple endings ever, causing a massive outrage that honestly could be its own video. For those who don't know, Mass Effect 3's final mission is a huge last-ditch battle involving all of your space friends as you fight against the Reapers, culminating in you nearly dying and having to climb up to the top of your anti-Reaper superweapon to finish the job. Once you reach the top, you're confronted by this ghost kid / AI called the Catalyst, who, for a bunch of reasons that don't make a whole lot of sense, gives you 3 options to resolve the central problem the big evil Reapers were created to solve: how to stop inevitable war between biological and artificial life. Firstly, you could destroy the Reapers and all other synthetic life, including your robot friends Edie the sexy robot and Legion the even sexier robot. Secondly, you could try to control the Reapers, becoming some sort of god. Or thirdly, you could try to hybridize organic and synthetic life completely, which was basically what the Reapers were trying to do the whole time. Now, in a vacuum, this is actually a fine, maybe even pretty interesting final choice. The problem is that Mass Effect as a series is built upon the foundational premise of getting to shape the history of the galaxy, not just in the sense of saving it, but also affecting political change, righting historical wrongs, and affecting lives on an individual scale, none of which really get a look in here. But here's the thing, I actually don't think Mass Effect 3 could have ended any other way. Even with the extended cut ending that adds a bit more dialogue, the option to refuse the catalyst, and some extra exposition at the end, to me it still just feels a bit hollow. Like it doesn't reflect the individual journey of your or anyone else's Shepard, because it can't. The exact same reasons that potentially killing the Council in Mass Effect 1 and the suicide mission in Mass Effect 2 were so cool, how much effect they could have on the story, is the reason why Mass Effect 3's ending is so weird. None of these characters are really allowed to have much of an effect on the ending, even when Tali could very well have first-hand experience negotiating peace between synthetics and organics, because for some players, she might just be dead. Mass Effect and many other games like it make the mistake of assuming that what players want out of alternate endings is maximum possible control over the narrative, to make grand, sweeping changes to the climax of a story. And that's exactly what you get here, but it's not enough, is it? I'd argue that what players really want out of an ending is much more simple. Proof that your choices, no matter how small, ended up mattering when all's said and done. And in Mass Effect, all those relationships you built, philosophical choices you made, and alliances you brokered, they just don't. They all wither away in the shadow of the 3 big buttons of doom. If we look back at all the games that do alternate endings right, they're the ones that focus on giving the player lots of meaningful narrative agency, but only within strict limits. After all, Pikmin doesn't let you become a feral king of apocalyptic Earth, nor does Dark Souls let you compromise on its final choice by having someone else light the flame or become the Dark Lord. To this effect, one of the most consistently successful forms of an alternate ending is what's known as a true ending, which definitionally gives the player almost no choice over the narrative itself, but does give them the responsibility of making it happen. Take the wonderful Nier Automata for example. By the way, some moderate spoilers for a very good game here. I won't talk about the content of the alternate endings, just what form they take. Skip to this timestamp to avoid them. Nier Automata might sell itself on its multiple endings, but in actuality they're very linear, with endings A, B, C, D, and E happening basically sequentially. Even what you think is a last-second branching path in ending C and D actually joins back up into the real ending once you've seen both. Sure, you can stop after Nier Automata's ending A, but until you've gotten all the way to ending E, the true ending, you've not really reached the resolution of the story. Which begs the— oh wait, the spoiler skippers are coming back. Play Nier Automata, you dumb idiot! Anyway, this begs the question of why games with the true ending bother having other endings at all if they're just going to get superseded regardless. Undertale's true pacifist ending is clearly the intended stopping point, and it renders all those endings you have much more control over null and void. And people forget that unless you find the magic glasses in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the game can actually end before you even go to the upside down castle and figure out what's really going on. Why have the option for the game to end prematurely at all if you can't really choose which ending is the real one? Well, the reason why true endings are so enduringly popular is the same reason why game overs, in many ways the original alternate ending, exist at all. You might not get to control where the story goes in these cases, but that's fine, because what ultimately matters is that your choice to stay invested and keep playing narratively pays off. It doesn't matter that, say, Bloodborne clearly has a best canon ending. The fact that you put in all that extra work to get it at all is what makes that choice worthwhile, not any illusion of control over the story. It's this philosophy of respecting a player's agency that I think makes alternate endings work, even in games that break the rules of how we think they're supposed to function. In the brilliant Citizen Sleeper, from the same mind that brought us In Other Waters, you begin the story fundamentally helpless. You play as a cyborg on the run from the company that created them, desperately scraping by as you attempt to avoid shutting down, starving to death, or getting hunted down by your quote-unquote owners. But, as you play, and gradually carve out a home for yourself, you can slowly move away from scrounging for scraps and reclaim some agency, eventually gaining the skills, contacts, or resources you need to set yourself free. All of Citizen Sleeper's endings, which I won't spoil, involve an escape of some sort, but each potential ending you get also gives you the option to turn away and choose to remain on the Eye space station. If you unlock and subsequently turn down every single ending, the game doesn't give you a pat on the back true ending or a game over, it just continues to let you exist, because you making your home on this station and choosing to stay in a place that was once literally out to kill you is a character arc and an ending in of itself, and the game acknowledging that in any obvious way would spoil a really cool choice that you might not have even known you were making. Just because a game doesn't give you a big dramatic credits roll or a final boss, that doesn't mean that it can't still have multiple satisfying endings. In the twisted How Fish is Made, the rotting fish you chat to talk a big game about the final choice of going up or down, but you'll never actually know what each choice means until you make it and find out where these chutes lead. You might think that the fact this decision is basically arbitrary robs it of its meaning, but the opposite is weirdly true. With nothing to optimize and no pressure to get the right ending, the fact that you pick up or down at all ends up feeling satisfying, regardless of what the result is. This is an idea that's also explored in the brilliant Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. Basically any of its, at my count, 43 endings could be your first, and the game will always end by booting you right back to the start. So what's the point if you have no control over them and the endings mean nothing? Well, where other games pretend you have control and just end up disappointing you, the Stanley Parable is all about the limited agency a player has to make choices in a video game. And by admitting that you have no real power beyond the order you see the endings in, you're freed up to seek out whichever funny thing you want to do next with no pretense or expectation beyond what you personally take away from each ending. The key to a truly good alternate ending that dodges all those pitfalls lies in this balance between giving the player agency but being honest about the limitations of their control. In Fallout New Vegas, the game never even entertains the idea of giving you a Ruler of Vegas ending because there will be no way to make it satisfying. Instead, The ending goes out of its way to detail all the effects of your journey and how you've personally shaped the future, from convincing the Brotherhood to potentially change their ways to maybe revitalizing the fortunes of Goodsprings. Hell, even when it comes to Mass Effect, the Citadel DLC is in many ways a better ending than the real one. Because rather than trying to stuff the entire game into a single 4-way decision, it doesn't really give you any major choices at all. All the DLC is about is letting you catch up with all the characters and see how your actions over all 3 games have affected them, which, at the end of the day, is all I think we really want out of an alternate ending. As trite as it sounds, an ending isn't just the end, it's a culmination of everything that's come before it and a resolution to the entire journey. Cramming a story through an arbitrary bottleneck or promising something too complicated to properly resolve will always lead to disappointment, and that's why it's imperative for designers and players alike to be on the same page about how much control over the story they should be sharing and what kinds of alternate ending they even want. Which is to say that it's about time we get onto the real topic of this video. Why isn't there an ending where Sonic and Shadow kiss? Huh? What's the deal, Sega? Why not give us the true ending that we've been waiting for decades? Just give the fans what they want, you fucking cowards. Oh god, I've gone too far. People are gonna think I'm a furry. Well, this one, it took a while, didn't it? Yeah, sorry about that, pals. I literally rewrote the entire script of this episode 3 times on top of condensing it down from 15 pages to just 6. People who make video essays over an hour long are cowards who don't know how to edit. There, that's my hot take, and I'm never taking it back. Anyway, you didn't come to the after the video segment, the post-game if you will, to listen to me rant, because there's been quite enough of that as there is. You came to witness my usual thing of shouting out some people who are much cooler and more talented than I am. Such as I Am Error, who is a fantastic video essayist who really deserves more attention for some great short videos and some equally good, really long videos. Alright, fine, I'm taking it back. I Am Error has managed to wring some really insightful material out of topics and games that I completely overlooked myself, like the Grow series of Flash games, which I loved as a kid and had completely forgotten about. And also, they always manage to come out with a refreshingly different perspective on bigger, more popular topics as well. Seriously, I was not expecting to hear quite as compelling a justification for Elden Ring being horribly imbalanced as I did, but my god did I Am Error successfully distract me with one while I was supposed to be editing this video. Please do check the channel out. But, of course, I wouldn't even be in a position to shout other, more deserving internet people out without my wonderful patrons, who keep this channel afloat and funded, meaning I don't need to take any money at all from Raid Shadow Legends, no matter how many times they email me. If you'd like to join them and get cool bonus content like early access, behind the scenes stuff, and bonus content like what I think about games that let you play after the ending, please consider joining the Patreon. It's a much better way to support me than watching YouTube ads, which totally suck. And if that wasn't enough, for those lucky few willing to pay $10 a month, they get their names read out at the end in the extra special list of my mysterious benefactors, who are Andrew Labrano, Alge, Asaran, Auna94, Bjorn Kala, Brennan Spalling, Brian Lotariani, Constantine Amend, Corey Gerard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, David Setzer, Das Kangaroo, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Diggy Dog, Digleteer, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkull, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dillon Riddle, Janos Fakete, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, Lee Berman, Lucas Thack, Mace Window 54, Max Filipov, Knox, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Pet Pumpkin, Peter D. Tomasak, Philby the Bilby, Phoenix Thurikaz, Rajigar, Reddidex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Right, with that done, I promise the next video will come out sooner. My bad on this one. See you then. Bye!